Before you play in the Arena Direct this weekend to try to win a booster box of the Hobbit, you should know that the data are telling a very subtle story about this sealed format. In the first Hobbit Arena Direct for collector boosters, I went on quite a learning journey, starting out with 2 0-2 runs, managing a 2-2 run, and then getting 2 clean 7-win, 0-loss runs in a row. It might surprise you to see that this incredibly weird and clunky looking deck was my second 7-0 deck in a row, but the success that I built was not just luck, it was me reacting to information that I was seeing in the data, so that is what I'm going to show you today. The first thing that I always like to look at is how good the different color pairs are doing in the data. So this is data from 17lanes.com representing how the different 2 color pair archetypes performed in the first Arena Direct for the whole span that it was out. On the horizontal axis here, we have a win rate. The win rates are pretty much all above 50% because these are from 17 lanes users who tend to be more invested and more winning on average. And by the way, if you're listening audio only, there are visuals, but I'm going to say all the important information. On the vertical axis here, we start at the least winning archetype and we go up to the most winning archetype. So if you think that the format is dominated by Rakdos, you're not wrong. It's the most played archetype. As you can see, because I size the points according to how many games have been played. And along with being the most played archetype, it's also almost the most winning. I say almost because technically the most winning archetype is actually Orzhov, white-black. It's winning about 0.6% more of its games than Rakdos, black-red, is. And actually the number of games played is not super negligible. It's maybe like the 6th or 7th most played archetype and also the most winning. I want to think about these data in 2 different camps. First, the supported, officially supported archetypes in the format. You've got Rakdos, the most played and also the most winning. Then there's Boros, much less played, the second most winning of the supported archetypes. That's red-white. And then up third, we have Golgari, black-green. But there's actually a really big gap. Then another really big gap, and at the very bottom, we have Azorius, blue-white, and Simic, green-blue. So I would say the supported archetypes fall into a better and a worse bucket. In the better bucket, you have Rakdos, black-red, and Boros, red-white. These are the 2 supported archetypes where I would say you're perfectly happy to end up in them. Then there's definitely a gap after this. And then there's Golgari. Golgari is not a bad place to be. This is maybe about the midpoint of the format. If you're in Golgari, you're not happy, you're not sad. You're maybe like a tiny bit more sad than happy. But I also don't want to exaggerate the differences between these. The total difference in win rate between these is like 3 percentage points. So among those 3 supported archetypes, you're perfectly fine. It's not a big difference. There is, however, a big difference between those archetypes and any of the supported archetypes that includes blue. So you pretty much actively do not want to be playing Azorius blue-white or Simic green-blue if possible. I'm certainly not saying you should never play them, but you want to lean away from those archetypes. Okay, so those were the officially supported archetypes. Now here's something interesting. There are some unsupported archetypes that are winning a whole lot and are not played that much. I specifically want to call out white-black, Orzhov, and blue-red, Izzet, as places that do not seem that bad to land. Orzhov especially has a pretty respectable number of games played and the highest win rate of any color pair. I often think, and this could be a whole video of its own, but I often think that if you have these archetypes that are winning a lot and are not super played, you can do a thought experiment where you imagine there are probably Orzhov decks that are better than, let's say, someone's Azorius deck, but which they don't think to build, especially because psychologically in this format, maybe you feel like you have to build one of the officially supported color pairs. But it's very possible that a bunch of people had in their pool a deck where if they swapped out the blue in their Azorius deck for black and made it a white-black Orzhov deck instead, they actually would have ended up with a better deck. It suggests the strength of Orzhov and its pure win rate suggests that you could add in a few, slightly worse Orzhov decks into there, and it would still be the most winning archetype. So some people could have switched into Orzhov instead and ended up winning more often. So I think the data suggests people could be playing Orzhov white-black a little bit more and could be playing Izzet blue-red a little bit more. So that might be a place that you can end up If you feel like you're kind of stuck playing a white-blue or green-blue deck and you know that maybe that's not the best place to be, I would say if you're leaning blue-white in your pool, you could start by asking yourself, do I have a good Boros deck here? That is, maybe I just take the blue out of this deck and I add in red instead, and maybe I would end up with a better deck because Boros is winning more on average. Or by the same token, do I have a good Orzhov deck or do I have a good Izzet deck? Just swapping one color for a color that I might not be thinking about as a possible pair that I can play. Okay, but because Azorius and Simic are struggling, I want to focus in on those two especially, because I think if you open a really good Rakdos deck or a really good Boros deck, you're probably going to know what to do with it. But what if I get stuck with a pool that doesn't have an obvious super strong aggro build? What exactly should I do? And by the way, if you like this kind of effortful, deep dive, data-informed content, make sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. I am building a community of limited improvers. We're getting better and better and better at limited magic every single day, and I want you to be a part of it, so make sure to subscribe. All right, so the first question to ask about Azorius is, when should I even play it? Like, why would I say no to should I switch into Boros? And a few of the reasons are, hey, maybe you got a really good blue-white rare. So a top example of that is Bard's Company. This is one of the top cards in the sealed format. This is the 2/3 for 2, a blue and a white. You can cast it with flash if you control a human. Your other creatures get +1/+1, and when it enters or attacks, you get to recruit. Yeah, if I open a Bard's Company or two, and I don't have the tools for splashing, maybe even if I could splash, this might really pull me in the direction of blue-white. Another one is the Arkenstone. This is the 5-mana artifact. Creatures you control at +1/+1 at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, but it also pulls you into white because it has an adventure, 2 and a white to search your library for a legend. If you have like a lot of draw 2 synergies in blue, let's say, like draw 2 payoffs in blue, the Arkenstone is turning those on. That might pull you in a blue-white direction. And then, of course, there are just raw bombs. Maybe I have raw bombs in white and raw bombs in blue, like a great Gilded Boat, the really good 4/4 artifact in blue vehicle, and then Unexpected Party in white. You know, if I have both of those, Unexpected Party is make a billion dwarves and then make your dwarves a billion each. If I have one of each of those, yeah, I'm going to want to play blue-white probably. But one thing I do want to emphasize is that I do actually think it should take a clear, compelling reason for you to get into one of these color pairs, blue-white or green-blue. Like, there should be a hook that is pulling you in that direction. And I say that because some of these numbers are bad. You know, I know that sometimes content creators like to overinflate the gap in some of these, you know, win rate differences and say that things are more imbalanced than they are, or that you'll get more of an edge than you actually will by avoiding a particular color pair. This is not one of those situations. The differences are not that big above, oh, say, I don't know, Selesnya and on up, or Golgari. Between Golgari and Rakdos or something, it's not that big a difference. But 17 Lands users are substantially better than the average population. They're usually winning like 55% with your average card in a given set, or with your average color pair in a given set. Simic is all the way down at less than 50%. It is very rare to see the players who contribute to this data set doing anything that has less than a 50% win rate. Like, the worst card in a format, if it's functional and limited at all, is rarely going to be that far below 50%. To see an entire color pair below 50% is pretty rare. This is something you want to avoid. I just looked back at every other format this year, and in Arena Directs, there was only one other color pair this whole year that also had a win rate below 50%, and that was red-green in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So green-blue in The Hobbit is in rare territory for how bad it is. In sealed, at least, also kind of in draft. I will also say, if you feel like this format is a little bit arbitrary, you might be onto something, because the overall win rates are lower than they usually are. Okay, but say that we have a good reason to be Azorius. How should we play Azorius? What's a good Azorius build look like in this format? What I'm going to show you now are the top 3 commons in Azorius, and I know they're going to surprise you. What do you think the top common in blue-white decks on 17 lands is specifically? Bring it to mind. Have you got it? Were you thinking of Esgaroth Garrison? I highly doubt it. This is the X5 for 5. Its power is equal to the number of creatures you control, and when it enters, you recruit. So this is a card that is basically unplayable in the draft format, but in sealed, it's actually the best performing common in blue-white, period. Okay, I actually overstated it. It's perfectly mediocre in draft, but in sealed, it's the best performing common in blue-white decks. Now, There are not that many numbers because probably not that many people are bold enough to play an Esgaroth Garrison, but I actually think it reflects something very real, so hold that thought. Okay, second best common is probably the one that you were thinking of. It's what I would have guessed. Patient Instructor, the 2/2 for 2 and an Azorius. Vigilance when it enters Recruit. And number 3 is Plunder the Trollshaws, the 2-minute draw card, flashback for 4, draw 2 cards. So I do want to point out one major commonality among these 3 cards, which I think really shows the strength of blue-white in this format. Well, it shows when this pretty weak archetype can be good, which is number 1, Esgaroth Garrison says Recruit. Number 2, Patient Instructor says Recruit. Number 3, Plunder the Trollshaws says draw a card. And by the way, also while you're at it, draw 2 cards. Every single one of these top commons draws you a card immediately. I mean, Recruit is not exactly draw a card, but you get what I mean. Being understated actually turns out to be okay in blue-white. At a floor, Esgaroth Garrison is a 2/5 for 5. Patient Instructor is always a 2/2 for 3. And yet that doesn't hurt these creatures. The actual rate on stats does not seem to be what drives card performance in this archetype. Card advantage seems to be important. To underscore this, I want to show you the letter grades of every 2-drop in Azorius specifically. So this is every 2-mana creature that Azorius has access to, with a few exceptions like the old Thrush or whatever, but the main 2 drops that it has access to. The specifics of the cards are not important. What matters is the distribution of grades. There is one 2-drop that is a C-, and on 17 lanes, C- is kind of bad. There are 2 2-drops that are D+, and on 17 lanes, D+ is really bad. And then there's another 2-drop, the last one, that is a D. And on 17 lanes, D is really, really bad. Why am I showing you this? Because I hear all the time when I work with limited improvers, oh, this is a fast format, so I have to play my 2-drops. This was one of the secrets I unlocked that made me go from an 0-2 gamer in the Arena Direct last time around to a 7-0 gamer. With some variance, with some luck, but I actually think this is a very real insight. I started out just jamming my 2-drops to not get run over by the aggro decks, but actually what you need to do in Sealed is not put air in a deck that has a different game plan that's better. Let me put it this way. The worst thing that you can do against an aggro deck with premium 2-drops, the worst thing you can do is play an inferior 2-drop. The worst thing you can do is to put down a 2-drop that is worse than their 2-drop, get your 2-drop killed or just outraced or just outvalued, and then you have nothing to bring to the table and the aggro deck is just going to run you over. I believe very, very strongly in Sealed, and you can take this too far, right? You should play some 2-drops in any deck, obviously. Try not to take turn 2 off. Try to advance your game plan on turn 2. But you should be advancing your game plan. You should be doing the thing that your deck does well, the comparative advantage of your deck. If I open a Bard's Company and I want to support that in blue-white, I am way better off jamming a bunch of Patient Instructors and pursuing a game plan where I draw cards and recruit and get a wide board that way than I am playing a whole bunch of Elven King Harpers, the 2/2 for 2 that can make something unblockable until end of turn that's playing out terribly. I'm better off not just jamming a bunch of those just because I feel like I have to when they don't advance my game plan at all. Because my opponent on Rakdos can just play a 2/1 Menace for 2 that is an equipment that's going to make something else have Menace in the late game, and I'm just on a path to lose. So when you are building these decks that are not just straight up aggro game plans in a highly aggressive format, I can't emphasize this enough. Don't just feel that you have to jam 2-drops. Figure out what the best plan for blue-white is, or whatever color pair you're playing is, and in this case, I would say it's card advantage, and do that thing as well as you can, and just try to make sure that you're contributing to it early enough that you can compete with some of the more aggressive aggro curve outs. So in the case of blue-white, don't just jam 2-drops, do draw extra cards. That's my advice. Okay, now let's talk about green-blue. And honestly, my advice is stay very far away from green-blue. So this chart at the beginning, it does actually include minor splashes. So like green-blue plus a single black card would be in this bucket of the 49% win rate. One of the worst win rates, tied basically for the worst win rate of any 2-color pair in 2026. So what should I do if I open I don't know, a bunch of really good green and blue cards. I really want to play them, but I know that just making a straight up green blue deck, I'm giving up almost 10 percentage points of equity right at the beginning compared to the best archetype. What should I do? The first thing to know is what color to add, because honestly, the answer is add a color. You have a whole bunch of green good cards, you have a whole bunch of blue good cards. Try to figure out where your other good cards are and add that color in. Actually, people have played enough 3 color combinations that include a green blue that we can rank them pretty confidently. I doubt these are going to shift much over the course of the week. So if you're starting in green blue, the thing you would most want to add is white to make Bant. White, blue, green. That's performing substantially better than Sultai, which is green, blue plus black. And those two have a big gap, and then they're performing better than Temur. I would say lean more in the Bant direction, lean a little bit less in the Sultai direction, and just don't play Temur, which is blue, red, green. To understand how you should pull this kind of a thing off, I want to show you one of the most eye-popping numbers, which relates to cards that are better in sealed than they are in draft. And the reason that I always look at this before every Arena Direct is because if you draft a lot, you're going to need to adjust your expectations to respect the fact that sealed is its own format with different card performance in draft. It's the same cards you're used to, but being in a different environment can affect their card strength. And there is a huge, huge eye-popping change here. The long-bodied gray dog is one of the biggest movers up from draft to sealed that I have ever seen in it's been like 6 or 7 months of making these kinds of slides, including for a bunch of flashback sets. And I've almost never seen a card that is this much better in sealed than in draft. So long-bodied gray dog is a 2/2 for 3 generic flash reach. When it enters, make a tapped treasure token. Let me show you the rest of the cards. Old Thrush, are you seeing a pattern already? The 1/2 for 2 flying. When it enters, you gain 2. You may search for a basic, reveal it, then put it on top of your deck. Number 3, Gandalf Wandering Wizard. These are the commons that are the most better in sealed than in draft. This is the 4/5 for 5 ward 3, and you can pay 6 to shuffle it into your library and draw 3 cards. Number 4, Velvet Wing Butterflies, the 2/2 for 3 flying, and it has an adventure to tap 1 or 2 target creatures. And then the 5th most improved common from draft to sealed, Ragged Short Spear. 2 mana, when it enters, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2. Then you can equip for 3. Equip creature gets +2/+0. Now, look at these percentages, especially the first one. Long-bodied gray dog in draft is a D+ level card. D+, which is terrible. When someone draws a long-bodied gray dog in draft, knowing nothing else about what's happening in their game, they have a 52% chance of going on to win the game. In sealed, they have a more than 57% chance. It's actually a 6 percentage point gap when you round, which makes it a B- level card. It goes from D+ as in Delta plus to B- as in Bravo minus. That is such a eye-popping gap. And then the Old Thrush as well, the other mana fixer in that makes no requirements on your mana up front. That is a 1/2 for 2, and instead of a 2/2 for 3, so they're both understated. And yet it is 3 percentage points better in sealed than in draft. So this tells me not just that these cards are better in sealed, but there's a correlation here, not just a causation. Decks that are splashing, I think, are doing better compared to decks that are not splashing than is typical in your typical sealed format. In other words, the tools for splashing are really good. When you are splashing and get those tools, you're probably on a good trajectory, much better than in draft, and probably better than in your average sealed format. I'll also quickly show you the uncommons because it tells a complementary story. So the most improved uncommon is Fearsome Goblin Pair, 1/1 for 3. When it dies, amass 4. Second most improved is Thror's Map, the 2 mana artifact. When it enters, search for a basic land, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Third most improved, Troop of Ponies, 2/1 for 2, 2-tap sack. You get 2 basics, 1 into play and the other into your hand. Fourth most improved is just a generically great card, down to Goblin Town. You pick a card out of their hand, then amass and drain a bunch. And then 5th most improved, also generically good, both for Reliable Guardian, 1/1 lifelink for 1, and 2 mana, you can give something hexproof or indestructible. These numbers are much, much smaller jumps, so the commons see a much bigger change, but I really want to point out to you, Thror's Map and Troop of Ponies being on this list tells me a lot. It is not always the case that the fixing pieces show up in this list. Actually, I don't know if I've ever seen that happen before. This might be the only format where I've done this, where the pieces that let you fix are the most improved consistently in sealed compared to in draft. That tells me this is a format where splashing is a much bigger part of what you should be doing in sealed than it is in draft. So back to how I got those 7-0s. How did I take the lessons that I've just told you and translate it into my second collector booster box? Well, I looked at my pool and I had some good rares and mythics. I mean, Bjorn the Fierce, this like 6/6 trample for 5, gives your bears +2/+2, makes things bears, makes them have trample and draws cards. I mean, I really wanted to play that. I also had some really good rares. Thranduil's Company is a fantastic card, even though it's in green-blue. This is the 3/4 for 2 a green and a blue. And if you control an elf, another elf, you can play 2 lands a turn. When a land comes in, you get 2 +1/+1 counters on something. And then I also had Double Down in the Valley, which is a good saga for mana fixing, and Chief Warg's Company. This was another rare that I wanted to play. 5/3 trample for 3, including Golgari, and it makes a wolf every turn. So I really wanted to play the bombs, especially Chief Warg's Company, Thranduil's Company, and Bjorn the Fierce. Before I had taken a look at the movers up and movers down in sealed and the best performing cards in Simic and Azorius especially, and just how bad it is to jam 2-drops when you're not already in one of those most aggressive decks, I think I probably would have gone with Golgari, just cut some of these red pieces, gone with a little bit less removal, maybe gone with fewer splashing pieces, maybe not been able to play the blue, and probably had a much worse deck for it because I really am not left with that much more. I have some random little 2-drops that I could have stuck in, like some Warglings and I don't know, maybe a Woodland Weave Master, and I do not think I would have gotten anywhere close to a box. Conversely, I also had some blue 2-drops. Maybe I could have stuck in a Lakeshore Apothecary, and a Master's Counselors kind of randomly along with some Warglings and tried to go green-blue or blue-black. Again, I don't think I would have gotten close. But what did we say? It's not just that you should just not do anything turn 2. The point is on turn 2, advance your game plan. And what I realized was it seems like splashing pieces are kind of working out pretty well. It's something that you don't mind doing at all in this format if you can set it up well. If you have the pieces like a long-bodied gray dog, Double Down in the Valley seems like a really nice way of doing splashing. So you shouldn't be afraid to just try to put your bombs into a deck and try to be able to cast them. But on turn 2, you can't just do nothing. You should still be trying to advance your game plan. And as things stand, okay, technically the Goblin Plate Mail is a creature, but I only have 5 creatures that come down by turn 2, and then only 1 creature that comes down on turn 3. So what exactly am I doing in the early game? That's when I noticed this terrible card. This is a D-, D as in Delta minus, almost a F level unplayable card in sealed. It's called Bjorn Reluctant Host. It's a 5/5 for 5 trample, and it has an adventure for 2. You may play an additional land this turn. Very awkward card. But I realized that by having 3 copies of this horrendous common in my pool, I could put it in my deck and use turn 2 to advance the game plan of getting my mana out fast. Okay, my opponent might be playing, you know, Night Howl Pursuer into Ravening Warg into something scary on turn 3 and so on. But what happened over and over again in my games was I would play Bjorn on turn 2 and I would, if I was on the draw, catch up with them in mana. If I was on the play, start to be way ahead of them on mana. And then instead of trying to compete with an inferior 2-drop like some random Warglings, suddenly I'm competing with your 2-drop by saying, okay, give me 1 turn and I'm going to play a 5/5. And your 2-drops might be better than my 2-drops, but your 2-drops are not better than my 5/5s. And Bjorn has this nice double purpose that it advances my deck's specific game plan on turn 2, while also adding to the top of my curve. So I actually had, if you include Thranduil's Company as a top bomb, and even Chief Warg's Company as a major heavy hitter, I actually had 8 different large creatures that come down essentially turn 5 or later, or are heavily impactful on the game turn 5 or later. So that meant that, okay, you might be outracing me for a few minutes here. You might get me down to like 12, 10, 7 HP, but I'm just going to start landing haymaker after haymaker after haymaker. And this deck was smooth as butter. I had a deck before this, which was double unexpected party, so I had 2 of the best bomb in the format. It did not feel nearly as smooth as this deck did. This deck almost never got into a spot where I felt I was losing. So those were the 2 lessons that really carried the day here. Number 1, don't just jam 2 drops because you feel that you have to. Try to spend turn 2 advancing a game plan that can beat the aggro decks. And do not fill your deck up with just empty air, like bad cards, like 2/2 for 2 that does nothing, that is going to be a wasted draw on turn 8 when you're trying to establish an advantage and not die to the final aggro push. Again, please don't come in the comments in a few days and say, I didn't run any 2 drops. I only had things to do turn 3 and later, and, I lost horribly. Well, that's not what I'm telling you to do. I'm saying spend turn 2 advancing your game plan, not doing a worse imitation of the aggro game plan. Okay, and then the other thing is, fixing is really good in this format, and you really want to avoid the trap of just falling into the supported archetypes because they're supposedly the supported archetypes. One last thing, the huge cardinal rule with splashing is to try to keep as close as possible to a classic 9/8 mana base. 9 lands of one type, 8 lands of the other type. I don't want to encourage people to go out and have 5 lands of 3 different colors and 2 dual lands. You're going to lose a lot to mana screw. So look at my mana base. I'm mostly a green deck because I'm trying to play Bjorn and Down in the Valley to get lands under me. So I had 8 forests and an Elven King Halls. That's 9 pips of my main color. And then my secondary color is black. I had 6 pips, but if you add in the double Down in the Valley and Thror's map, you're really looking at 7 to 8-ish black ways of playing black. And I don't really need to play black cards immediately most of the time. And then I had 2 pips of other colors, 1 island and 1 mountain, both of which I could fetch with my Thror's map or with my Down in the Valley. And you're looking at 2 different dual lanes here as well. So what makes a responsible mana base is it as close as it can possibly be to a classic 9/8 mana base? Also, 2 other crucial rules of thumb. The cards that I'm splashing do not need to come down early. If I don't play a Misty Mountain Raider exactly on turn 5, it's not a disaster. If I don't play a Pinecone Strike exactly on turn 2, it's not a disaster. And Thranduil's Company is good at any point in the game. And also, each of these cards only requires 1 pip. I'm not splashing a bunch of double off-color pipped cards, which are going to be very hard or maybe even impossible to cast. All right, with all of that said, if you do go for a booster box this week, have tons of fun. And I really do mean it this time. Don't be afraid to splash.